welcome to the Artist Collective radio show. I'm your host, Shoshana Pearson. I'm so glad that you could join us today because I have a very, very special guest for you. I first met Jeff Schroeder of the Smashing Pumpkins in 1996 when he came through Dallas on tour with the band The Violet Burning. He since went on to join the band The Lassie Foundation before finally joining the Smashing Pumpkins in 2007, where he has remained ever since. In this episode, we talk about what it was like to go from playing with smaller known bands like the Lassie Foundation and the Violet Burning before joining a behemoth like the Smashing Pumpkins. We also talk about the spiritual journey of Jeff's artistic and creative endeavors, where he's at now and what he's working on, and how becoming himself has fully informed him to where he can launch a solo career. So stay tuned and listen in and like, subscribe, follow, share, and do all the things. We're so glad that you've joined us in this community, and we are so glad that you can be a part of it. Let's check in with Jeff now and see what he's up to. Here we go. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to see you. Thank you so much for coming in and sitting in on my little talk show, the Artist Collective radio show. It's so great to see you, to see your face.
Yeah, so good to see you too. I'm trying to think, when was the last time I actually saw you in person?
I think you got us backstage when you played here in Dallas in 2015 or 16.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, probably 2015. Yeah.
Okay, so it's been a minute, but before
but not
that,
that
it had
long.
been,
But yeah.
Before that, it had been a long time because we met in 95, I think 1995 or 6.
Probably 96, because I think that record came out in early 96, and we toured that year a lot on that, where went over. Yeah.
So you were on tour with Violet Burning.
Yes.
And you guys played at Club Dada here in Dallas, which is no more, but it was iconic for years. And
if I remember correctly, a pretty small stage, like not very high off the ground, if I remember correctly.
From my perspective in the audience, it seemed maybe higher, but maybe not as high as other stages. I don't know.
I don't know. I could be totally remembering the wrong place.
It was pretty tall and long, but narrow. I think was this particular space, but it had like 4 different clubs off of it too. So there was some milling about.
Oh, sure.
That sort of thing. But so I was like 19, and is that right? Yeah, I was 19, and it was hugely pivotal for me. That whole that show kind of set me on an interesting course. But you tell me how you got to that point. I want to go back a little bit to your childhood, your upbringing, your first generation on your mom's side. Is that right?
Yeah, well, my mom immigrated, in the 60s, and then, I'm mixed heritage. So, but so my brother and I actually, my brother was actually born in Korea. So,
really?
And then I was born here in the United States. But but we lived, a very interesting life, because having like a white father and a Korean mother basically, I was born in the mid 70s. And even though I was in California, it wasn't like it is now. Things are, I don't say it was bad, but there was very little consciousness about like how to raise like mixed race children or anything like that. Basically, you were going to be raised as a quote unquote white person, because we grew up in the suburbs. At our school, the school I went to, there was maybe a handful of Latinos, and I think there was me and like a Japanese American You know what I mean? There was very little, racial diversity at that point, where I grew up. And it wasn't, I didn't even grow up in the very nice suburbs. It was just, but it was in the suburbs of LA and Orange County. And so it was a very, not, I wouldn't say a sophisticated upbringing in that way, but different than maybe many kind of immigrant families is, my mom, because maybe she was already a little bit like a rule breaker in a way that she was like, I'm going to, marry a non-Korean man. I'm going to immigrate to the United States. I'm going to do all these things that, maybe would be considered rule breaking. She wasn't with me. She let me kind of follow my passions. And so when I discovered music early on, they were always very encouraging. It wasn't like I grew up in an artistic household, but they did pay for guitar lessons. And through paying for guitar lessons is kind of how was originally the pathway how I ended up to meeting you and your brother that night, because I went into a local music store where I grew up, and I met this guy, Dave Koval, who I didn't know at the time, but a few years down the road, I realized, because I was a kid, so we didn't talk about who his roommates were, who he was living with, right, and things like that. But he was actually roommates with Michael Pritzl, who was the lead singer of the Violet Burning, and primary. Okay. And so I took lessons from him for like maybe 3 or 4 years, quit for a while towards the end of high school, and then kind of reconnected with Dave right after I graduated in the summer of '92. I ran into him at a coffee house, which were kind of like a new thing. There were no Starbucks or anything yet, but it was like, right, oh, they have like this open mic night at a coffee house. And so I heard about it, and then I ran into my old guitar teacher there. And so I started taking lessons from him, but instead of taking them at the store, I took him at his apartment. And so one day I was having my lesson, and, I'd been playing quite a while by then, so we were probably just jamming or something. Michael heard me playing through the wall and asked Dave, like, hey, who was that you were playing with, today? And he said, oh, it's my student. And then Dave said, hey, Michael's band, they need a guitar player. I'm going to, and he was kind of asking about you. So he put us in contact. And so that's how I met those guys. And I was just graduated high school, so I was just 18. I'd been in some cheesy, high school garage bands, but I was lucky that I was able to, because I could play well enough that I went from doing that to I joined this band. And then we went and started playing, like, because they had already been, as they had already been around a while, and they were kind of going through a period of transition. And so it was great for me because they had all this experience. They had this catalog of song. They already had a fan base. And I just got to jump in and got to play like every big club in LA, when I was 18, just turning 19. And so I think by the time I met you, I was probably 21, maybe 22. So wasn't that long from that time, but it was all because of that.
Very, very interesting. So what did your parents think about you going on the road with the rock and roll band? Had you started college at that point, or you put that off for a while? Or
they were, like I said, they were encouraging, and because I was lucky in that, it was, wow, like you're going and you're playing all these like venues, and there's people at the shows. And when I really think about it now, I was painting my fingernails weird, dyeing my hair, and like sleep. I'd go. Our drummer at the time, had a rehearsal spot way up in LA. So we would go rehearse till, 10 p.m. and then we'd go out to like clubs. And then I wouldn't get home until like 2, I'd have to drive back to the suburbs to get home like 2:30 and 3 in the morning, sleep till 1 in the afternoon. And they didn't care. So I realized like that was very supportive of them. But I did, to answer your question, I did go to college at first, but I didn't really take it seriously. And I didn't know, I didn't apply myself in high school. I wasn't college bound. And, coming from that was maybe the other side of, I had a certain amount of freedom to explore music and be a musician and do those kind of things, even though they didn't like groom me to be a quote unquote an artist and think like an artist. I was just a rock and roll kid into guitar and being in bands and stuff. But it was enough of a, of an artistic hub that eventually it would blossom into other things. But they weren't like, hey, you need to focus on school and get good grades and take the SAT and think about going to a 4-year college. It was a very working class, blue collar family. And so I didn't really have a plan. And so I graduated and I was like, well, I'll just go to the local community college. And, I was like, because I'm into music, I'll take some music classes. But I didn't really, I was into playing guitar, and then you're in a music theory class. And I wish I would have applied, now in hindsight, I go, wow, I really wish I would have applied myself a little bit more. But at the time I was like, well, I already kind of know this stuff, like, because, I'd taken lessons. So I knew like scales and chords and modes and kind of how to play over them and put them together. So then you go into, music theory 1 that you have to take. And it's like, you're sitting in front of a piano and they're like, this is a step, this is, this is a major scale. I'm like, I could do all of that. And so I didn't really pay attention because, and then I ended up, I was playing shows all the time. And I honestly got more out of just hanging out with friends and learning about bands and music and books and things like that, hanging out rather than going to class. So basically I would sign up for classes and then never go. And so I actually had like horrible grades. And so, so then by the time I met you, I was on tour quite a bit, and, it'd been like kind of 3-4 years of putting everything into that band and working really hard. And we put out that record and worked really hard, but we were having trouble getting over into that next hump. And so I became kind of a little bit, I wouldn't say like disillusioned, but worried about what my future was going to be. And so towards the end of that year, I started thinking like, man, maybe I should go back to school. And so I had my friend send me it, because this was like no internet, nothing like this. So I had to have my friend.
It's so crazy to think about.
I had to have my friend go to the college, the community, and get a course catalog, mail it to me to my friend's house that we were going to stay at in England. And in the middle of the night, I went to a payphone because you had to register my classes by the phone.
Oh gosh. And that was like advanced technology when you could register over the phone.
Yeah,
I remember being like, oh, we don't have to wait in line to go pick our classes. This is awesome.
So I went and I registered for all these, and I went back, and I had a completely different experience, because I was like, okay, I need to apply myself. And I was much more open-minded about focusing. And I went and saw a counselor, and the counselor was like, hey, I can sign you up for this program where if you maintain a certain GPA for a certain amount of semesters, we can wipe all the F's that you had for the classes that you signed up for and didn't show up for.
That's nice.
So I basically got to have a restart, and I took it much differently. I approached it much differently, but I still didn't really, like I said, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And the strange thing that happened is I signed up for it was a mythology class, and it was taught by this guy who was a professor there at the college, who was married to a woman that was actually later would factor into my life, because she was in a department that I went to when I transferred to a different university. But I didn't, but anyways, but I wasn't close to her, but she worked with someone that I worked very closely with when I transferred. But for some reason, he didn't show up. And to be honest, like, I think they ended up going on sabbatical or something. So they canceled that class. Thank goodness. Because I think my life would have been very different had I, so in a weird way, it was very fortunate. I'm so glad that class got canceled. And so I got this letter one day, and it said, sorry, intro to mythology has been canceled. So we've put you in this intro to Shakespeare class. But if you don't want, you can take these other courses, will fulfill that requirement. But I was like, I'll give it a try. I'd read, I actually was always a good student in English in high school. And so I had honors English and stuff. So I had read a bunch of Shakespeare plays and I always enjoyed them. So I said, I'll take this class. Completely blew my mind, transformed. And it was really because of that I went down this other pursuit of other road of pursuing literature. And that was really it. And then once I kind of that happened, it just opened up all these other doors and pathways for me that led to many other things.
That's so interesting. I had a transfer of majors as well to literature because I was majoring in communications or something, and I don't even know what that is now, but I took a literature class and the teacher was going over the syllabus about all the things we were going to read, and I started getting like, oh my gosh, and then I was like, oh, I think maybe I should change my major because I'm so excited about what I'm going to read. And then I changed to literature, and I've always sort of worked in something to do with the words or writing, or so it served me well. But that's just kind of interesting. So
wow,
how long?
Yeah.
How long were you in Violet Burning? When did you leave that, and what did you do from there?
Well, I basically left that year, so end of 96, early 97. And I joined, and for a brief second, I was going to be in this band called Amnesia with Brad Lehner, who was in this band called Medicine that I was big fans of. But he had just started that band. They had put out a record on Island, and Jason Pickersgill and my friend Jeremy were both playing in his band. And so they were trying to get me in that band. And so I went to Brad's house and learned the songs, but I just kind of knew, I got to stick around home. I can't go back out on the road. I want to go back to college. And so I decided to not do it. And then I joined with Eric Capisano and Wayne Everett and those, and joined the Lassie Foundation. And that was, early 97.
Because they were more stationary, they were more not touring, or?
Yeah, well, it was just like, hey, it's hard for me to think about what my logic was back then. I actually, because sometimes it's like trying to get into my mindset. I just
gotta
didn't
follow
have
your
a good
instincts.
feeling. Yeah, I just knew I needed. Yeah, I knew that with Lassie wouldn't be. Even though we did end up doing some touring and whatnot, but the band had never played a live show at that point. So it was like, hey, we're just putting the band together to play some shows. And so it was just going to be local. I could stick around home, kind of get my life back in order, kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And it was great because through that band, we ended up making quite a few records and
which you
it was
just
like
re-released some for Lassie Foundation, is that right?
Yeah. We had just started. We got, we finally went back and tracked down all the old, the masters, and then had our friend Chris Colbert remaster everything. And, there was some rights issues, we released some of these records with some indie labels that don't exist anymore, but they sold their catalogs to some third-party companies. And so we now have the rights to everything again. And so
good.
We just re-released California, and we're getting ready to release Pacifico, but we're going to do actually California and Pacifico on vinyl too. So we're going to do a little Kickstarter for that to raise some money to pay for the cost of doing that. So so that's really exciting because it's finally, for once after all these years, we have the whole catalog to ourselves and can basically be in control of it. And not because we obviously not to really monetize it, because it's not really worth that much money, but as far as just all of us have a tie to it. And so for people who maybe discover me through Smashing Pumpkins or whatnot, and they want to explore more of my musical past, they haven't been able to listen to any of that stuff. So we just want it to be available everywhere. So we're finally getting to that point where it's just like, okay, everything is going to be available on whatever streaming platforms and whatnot. So we're really happy about that.
And for people like me, listening to that puts me right back to that 19-year-old girl, where I listened to that music so much during that period of time, and I forget you have all these other things that come in. And so when it was first released and I listened to it, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot what it feels like to be that age and looking forward to all this stuff. And now we're kind of at the age where we are in the middle, where we still have things to look forward to, but there's all this stuff that we've done and experienced. And I think listening to some of those old sounds just bring me back to that moment that was so full of possibility, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting going back and trying to rethink like what we were trying to accomplish, what we were trying to do, and what succeeded. And interestingly, from an artistic perspective, I can see perhaps much more clearly now of why it didn't work too. At least the level of that, because we had much higher ambitions than we ever accomplished. And so that's
sure,
as a creative person, right, you have to look at like what, you're constantly looking at your process and the things you're doing and trying to fulfill, like, okay, I have an artistic desire, but to make a living, you have to actually have some type of business success, which is oftentimes we struggle with because doesn't seem in alignment with our artistic motivations. And so you have to find that balance always, so I can look back and go like, oh, wow, like, maybe we should have done this better. We should have done that better. But it was a really innocent time for us. And so that's what I think I miss the most. When I'm getting nostalgic for it, I miss the it was all new.
Yeah.
It was all new. And, and now for me to move, say 20 years now into the present, and I'm in this very big established band where everything is super pro, super professional, but it's so different. It's so like you get there and you think like, that's what I want, and it's not, and that's not to say that it's bad. It's just not what you think it's going to be. And I remember, I don't know what the look on my face was or something, but it was this is probably maybe like 10 years ago now or something. We're ready for Pumpkins, ready to go on stage. You're kind of waiting, the intro music's on. And Billy looks at me, and he goes, "It's not what you thought it was going to be, huh?" Kind of like this whole thing, like it's like this whole business. It's not, when you're a kid, you're like, oh my God, like it's going to be this or that. And then when you're there, it's actually quite different. That's not to say that it's bad. It's just that, when you're young, we're watching MTV, you think everything's going to be like a Van Halen video. I think it's just chaos backstage, endless parties, and you're like, wow, it's a business, and it's
right. For the ones that are successful, there's a lot of professional business stuff that happens, right?
Yeah, and especially as you get older, it doesn't look like a Van Halen video.
We gotta make it present that way. So tell me a little bit about, you went from these more indie type bands to the Pumpkins. Tell me about that transition. Tell me what it felt like for you to do that audition, to get the gig, to go to your first show where you had this, talk about a built-in fan base. Violet Burning was big, but Smashing Pumpkins is obviously exponentially bigger. So tell me what that felt like to that kid that you were. I mean, compared to
it's crazy,
not so much of a kid, but
it's nice to talk to you about this because you actually know some of these people. So it's actually Jason 71 messaged me one day. I was at UCLA. I'd taken the literature path like full bore, and I was getting my doctorate at UCLA. which is funny because I saw that you had Matt Kelly, on here. And so I remember running into him when he was getting his doctorate, I think in Middle Eastern Studies, right? So we would, run into each other on campus at times, although we didn't run into each other in courses or anything like that. But I was fully immersed in that world and kind of given up on having a professional music career. Although, so like when I first went to graduate school, I just, for like the first couple of years, I didn't even really play guitar much or anything like that. I just kind of was like, okay, I went through a very weird phase where I was like, okay, like, and it's only funny, I only admit this now, like I think because I'm more comfortable in myself, but I went through this phase where it's like, I'm gonna stop trying to dress like a musician or whatever that means. You know what I mean? And so
you take the fingernail polish off.
Yeah, so it's like I started
naturally.
buying clothes at the Gap and stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with buying clothes from the Gap, but you know what I mean? I was like,
you wore some denim and some khakis. Is that what you're?
I was like, well, I'm gonna hear an academic, you know what I mean? Like, whatever, I'm just gonna do my thing. And but then after a couple of years, sorry. Totally. But then after a couple of years, we decided to start. We were, because we were all around. They said, "Hey, let's do another Lassie record." And so we actually did do another record while I was in graduate school, and donned the rock and roll clothes again. And but so kind of sometime during that, Jason texted me and said, "Hey, I know someone who's working for Smashing Pumpkins the management company or something." And so they putting the word out, like they're reforming, they're in LA working on a new album right now. James and Darcy aren't coming back, and so they're looking for a bass player and a guitar player. And he's like, I really think you should audition for this. I had never really, I guess I semi-auditioned for Brad Lehner's band, but it was like I just went to his house, we played guitar together, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you can play great." So it wasn't like a real audition, but this was like, "Oh, can you send a bio and a photo to this email address?" I didn't have a bio, so I wrote one, which I was great because I could totally tailor it how I wanted to, and so I actually got a call like within a day or two of submitting it. And I was like having, I think, breakfast with Billy and Jimmy somewhere in the Valley, like a couple days later, and started that process of getting to know each other. And it wasn't like a one-day audition where I just went and auditioned and they said, "Okay, we'll let you know how it goes." It was, since they were in LA kind of finishing this record, they were going to be there a while. They were like, "Hey, let's come by the studio, hang out with us. We'll jam a little, then we'll go. And some days we jam a little bit." And it was over a period of months.
Okay. So when you submitted your bio and stuff, did you also submit like previous work, or
I did?
Had they heard anything that okay.
Well, yeah. And then, because our friend, I don't know if you know, our friend Tatiana was actually working for the band as like, because at this time it was like 2006, every band, a big band, had to have a web person, to run the band website. And so she was she was our close friend. So she saw my name. Oh, she's like, "Yeah, Jeff's totally my friend." And in fact, it was like her birthday. She had a birthday party at her house and Billy was going to be there. She said, "Oh, you to come." And so I met Billy at her birthday. And then Lassie, we actually played a show and Billy came to the show. We played a show and he, so that was
no
like
pressure.
I know. Pressure. Like obviously, like you're standing there and like you see this guy walking in, you're like, "Oh gosh," you know what I mean? Like,
so awesome.
Amen. And and like so he did. Obviously, he saw us play. He saw me play live in person. So, but once I joined, there's after months of kind of hanging out and playing and stuff, and they had other people come in and decided, okay, like Jeff's gonna get the gig. That was like, seemed like, oh my god, like that was so exhausting. Like it really I'm trying to do like this high level coursework at UCLA while like having months of like, am I going to like quit graduate school to join this big rock band, which is like, I don't even know what that's going to be like. So I did, eventually got the gig and did it. But man, like it was like, that seemed, like I said, that seemed like I'm tired from that. Like it was so crazy. It was like mentally exhausting because it was a question. And like, how could you just be like, well, I'm just going to do my thing. I don't know. Like, you're like, when am I going to find out? Is it going to happen? If it does happen, what's my life going to be like? Yada, yada, yada.
I mean, right. Because I do lots of auditions. And so I think I feel that to a much lesser degree because I haven't done an audition for something that could potentially radically change my entire trajectory, my entire life. Like this that you're talking about. So hanging in limbo is always hard, but hanging in limbo when your whole life could be completely altered.
Yeah.
It is. It's an emotional, psychological, exhausting experience. So you've gotten the gig now and you're going to play your first show. Tell me how that feels.
Well,
if you can remember.
I remember it exactly. It was in Paris, it was the first show. It was like, and it was a theater, like, like a 3,500 seat theater, maybe something like that. We played probably like 3.5 hours or something like this. It was like a really long show. So, just the rehearsal. I walked into rehearsal with my 2 guitars that I had when you saw me play. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
Ratty guitars, And I remember the guitar tech at the time was like, I brought my, guitars and he's like, I've never seen 2 dirtier guitar. I just had no idea. I just didn't know any better. And, I walked into rehearsal and there was all these guitars, new guitars for me, the amps, like, cause I didn't have, I was a poor graduate. I was, living a life of a graduate student on the graduate student money, which is like, you're in the hole, you're taking out student loans to live in LA to survive. And so I didn't have money to buy all this gear. So I wanted all this gear. So even that was just, like I said, thinking the audition was hard. It's like, once we went into rehearsal, it was just like, I was in way over my head the whole time. But what a great place to be in, if you really think about it. If you have an opportunity to improve, to be around people who are better than you, but be exposed to that type of knowledge, talent, it's a great place to be, as hard as it is. It's very difficult. But I will say that I had to make kind of a big decision right then at that time. Is like, okay, like this isn't going to be easy. And so if you're going to do this, you're going to have to put in the work to become a better musician, to improve yourself, to get better every single day. And because I don't think I was that great to begin with, in the band, you know what I mean? I think that, but I think that they saw, the reason, and I think what they saw, why I got the gig and why I stayed in the band during that whole time, is that I was willing to put in the work to get better always. And so when I look back at that person 15 years ago who joined the band to the person now, it's a much different experience. But it was tough. It was really tough. And I don't remember, even though I remember that first gig, I don't remember a lot of the gigs. I certainly remember going and playing them and stuff, but I was so nervous and just so like, don't mess up, like just trying to like hold on, that
keep it together.
It's like when you're scared to go on a roller coaster, so you're just like gripping tight, you're closing your eyes, you're not really enjoying the ride. That's kind of how it was for me, to where now I'm like, oh, I'm like having a good time, this is so fun, isn't this great? Like you enjoy the thrills, and so now I enjoy playing with the band so much more because I really enjoy the experience. But the first couple of years I was just terrified.
When I got back into improv again, and I was doing shows for the first time in 10 or 15 years, I felt what you are describing. And
Yeah.
people come up to me and they're like, oh, I remember I came to see that show. And I was like, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about, because I don't remember the show. I don't remember who was there. I don't remember anything except I was up there and I got through it, because it's so terrifying. And all you can think of is like, you can only see this far in front of your face.
Yeah,
So,
I don't know how you do that. That's, to me, is much more terrifying. Like now, I really like being in a band. It's like you have the whole band behind you, have this loud sound. Like, but doing improv where you're like with the small, either by yourself or with a small group of people, having to like literally, you know, improvise on the spot. I mean, that's pressure.
it's really not much different from playing music. I mean, after a while you get to you know, it's written and you know the way the music is supposed to go, but at first, you know, sometimes when you're
Yeah.
just creating, it's improv. And I think when you work with a team of improvisers that you learn to trust, it becomes just easy. I haven't gotten to that point because but I think that people do, and I think it makes it's easier the more you do it.
Sure, sure.
And I think it's interesting that you're talking about being dedicated to improving your craft, because in my last interview with Conrad Keeley, he said essentially the same thing, that it's kind of an artist's obligation to become better at what they do, to improve upon it, so that they can encourage the next generation to do that. So how much of what you do is forward facing for those that come after you? Is there any bit of influence of trying to affect future generations, or are you just putting music, creating for art's sake? Why do you do what you do?
I don't really think about like what I'm trying to convey message wise to future generations in that way, even though I think that maybe like your example will kind of emote that to a certain extent. Like for me, the like what it means to improve is kind of has a few different dimensions. There's, you know, from a artistic perspective, you know, from like say like a technical perspective, I play the guitar. It's a physical instrument. There's timing, there's, you know, an athleticism to the actual skill. And so like things like that are things that I work on all the time. Like, can I play cleaner, faster, more accurately, or more inventive chord voicings? You know, can I improvise over chord changes better? Like, can I be more in the moment? Can I internalize all these, you know, note choices, so when I'm in the moment, I can speak freely. You know, so there's that. And a lot of that has to do with being creative, in that when you have maybe a feeling, emotion that you're trying to reach through sound, you know, you have to look towards like, okay, like this is a humanistic thing that I'm feeling here, and I have to translate that into notes or sound. And so the more language symbols that you have at your fingertips, say for me, helps me speak what I want to speak through my music there. So there's like working on those things, right? So that's why I may go like, hey, when I was in Chicago, I took like 3.5, 4 years of jazz lessons, you know, and I was a terrible jazz player, but it taught me so many more chords and voicings and ways to approach notes. And like that, even though I couldn't play jazz per se, it really pushed my guitar playing to a much higher level because of that, you know. So I'm all, you know, and then I'm always, because I'm lucky enough to be in a big band, I can reach out to these famous guitar players and be like, hey, can I take, you know, and they're always super cool. Like, hey, can I take a lesson with you? So I've had lessons with guitar players that I've just been fans of, that I want to learn something from. So I really like to play. And so I work really hard that way, you know, but so then there's that, but then there's like, and I think this is something we kind of talked about over email. and I think this is probably even the more important part, is there is a spiritual journey to all this as well. And that's a very loose word, and many people, you know, have a very like spiritual, they mean like church or religion or organized religion, or it's a very personal thing. And I'm not going to try to define like what it is, but you know, I think for me, it's probably, it leans more like on this kind of personal journey of like of what I'm doing, and like kind of why have I been doing this since I've been a kid? Like what is it ultimately has all this kind of taught me about life? And then so maybe this is a way to answer your questions about what am I leaving, you kind of, you know, future generations, and what advice I would give to someone maybe at the beginning of their journey. You know, really what it's about is, and especially as I've gotten older and I'm, you know, starting to release like music, you know, more on my own and stuff, things like that, where it's really about being yourself and exposing yourself, because I do believe that there is a uniqueness to every single one of us, you know, just like whatever the creation, you know, of life and the universe and the world and all that stuff, like for some reason each one of us is a unique being. Like even though people look almost similar, like you can, you know, everybody looks a little bit different, and there's something about the way our minds work and our personalities that there's no two people that are truly alike, you know, at least, you know, my kind of understanding of it, or at least, you know, to a deep enough extent. So as an artist, when you're trying to kind of convey what it is that you do, what you have to say to the world, you know, sometimes we like to wear masks of other people, and that's okay. And especially when you're a younger band or a younger artist, you emulate people you're into. But really, to get to that place of, I think, satisfaction artistically, like where it was like, wow, it's satisfying to me, is really creating, like being truly yourself. And that can be hard because you have to expose what you like, what you really, things that you're into, things that people may make fun of or laugh at or be very moved by, or that whole, you know, you have to, you know, because we're always giving these things out to the world, you're having to face that criticism. It's very difficult, you know, it's very, you know, and this is a word that people, you know, is very vulnerable. You do have to leave yourself open to that type of vulnerability to do that. But to me, that's really where it's at. It's where it's kind of coming into that, because then it's really where I guess maybe the spiritual dimension of it is like, it's actually radical acceptance of yourself. You know, and because it's really, because I think when we think of things that oftentimes hold us back in life, in especially, but if we're going to be even more like directed, like artistically, you know, and it's hard oftentimes to lead an artistic life, is we deal with like inner criticism, right? Criticizing ourselves before we even give what we want to do or want to say a chance to even evolve into something. So I think like learning to just be okay with myself and what I like and the sounds I create and the chords I like and the type of music that I like and all these kind of things, and trying to combine them in ways that I like, that make me smile. I think that's been like kind of more where I'm at now than before, which I had no knowledge of that when I was 22, when you met me. I was just like, hey man, I'm just like, you know what I mean? Just trying to like, you know, trying to figure out so much about life. And, but now it's really like, okay, you know, for as long as I can physically do this, it's more about like translating kind of what kind of flows through me out into the world, you know, and doing that as kind of honestly and authentically as possible. And that's a, you know, that's no easy task.
Do you think that this Do you think that how you've evolved into adulthood and getting that perspective on yourself has influenced what you've done musically, or what you've done musically has influenced your adulthood, or they're symbiotic and there's not it's not one or the other? And does that make sense? Is it
No,
an internal thing that you're doing that just sort of manifests itself in your art, or are you experimenting with your art and learning about who you are in the process?
I think it's symbiotic for sure. It's a combination of things, like, when I really let myself go sometimes, like it's weird because I've done a few musical things, like that are more recently, and I was talking to Wayne from Lassie Foundation, and he was like, yeah, like it's so interesting, like this record you did, it's so dark, and I don't hear it that way, but compared. But compare, but I guess he's talking about this band I did, this record with this called Night Dreamer, and to me it's like it's kind of like, I guess it's like a little bit, what I mean, but it's like still very pretty too, in my but I don't hear it as like, because I don't consider myself like a dark person at all, like I'm not, but compared to Lassie Foundation, it's like, it is, on the darker side of the spectrum, but that's, and I realize that a lot of my music has this element in there of that doesn't come out in like my surface level personality, like when I'm interacting with people, like I'm not like a dark brooding person out on the street walking the dog or anything, anything like that, but it does. So there are things that I learned, but there is something about, I think, my kind of deep psychological experience of life, and from childhood to adulthood, and through later adulthood, mid-adulthood, I mean, that our unconscious and things that we, that become submerged, they do come out, and they come out more in my music, and not to say that I lived like a totally like horrible life or childhood, but I think that of course we all have experiences that are painful and hurt, and that we kind of submerge sometimes because we're just trying to survive in the present and deal with, and so those things come out. So it is, I think there's that element of it. I'm a big reader of things, so I'm always trying to push my thinking and evolve my thinking in different ways, and I'm certainly not like the person I was 20 years ago in terms of how I view, say, like more esoteric things like that, or, what I mean? And even the music, I like some things for my musical past, but there are many things I like now that I had no idea of back then. And so I feel like I'm always, trying to expose myself and push myself. And it's the music, it's the pursuit of music, it's outside influences as well. I think it's kind of a ball of things.
And what I noticed about what you were saying was, I suppose in this song that you recently released, tell everybody the name, because I am sure that I will not pronounce it correctly.
Oh, the name is Haenim, which is Korean for the sun. And it was a song written by a Korean guitar player, Shin Jun-kyung, and it was recorded by a young woman, and I think she was just, basically a teenager, Kim Jung Mi, and I think it came out in 1973. And it's kind of like psych folk at that time, post psychedelia, and it's just this, I thought it's just a very beautiful song about being rejuvenated, essentially, like being rejuvenated by the countryside, like it's life is kind of, Korea was under a military dictatorship, essentially, US, I would say US encouraged, if not that, and Shin Jung-hyun, because he was a musician, I think he got busted at some point, maybe for smoking weed or something too, so he had suffered a bit under the government and stuff. And so it's just a very kind of simple song of like, hey, I need to go and kind of like get some healing, and this is where I go to the countryside and kind of receive some healing. And so I thought, like, considering what the world and our country and everything had gone through, it'd be like a nice kind of first foray into releasing some music under my own name, and kind of point the ship, at least like this is kind of where I'm at, 2021. And yeah, so nothing, nothing too deep, other than that.
That's pretty deep.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I loved it. I love it. I think it sounds it sounds nostalgic to me, but I can see a bit of melancholy, but that doesn't seem dark to me. That just seems like the reality of life at our phase of life, because in our 20s, we hadn't seen as much as we've seen now, for better or worse. So
crazy, yeah.
Whereas when we were in our 20s and we had all these possibilities and potential, we were stored potential energy. Now we've used some of that energy, but we've gained all of this information and knowledge and experience and depth, I think. And so that melancholy makes it richer. In my opinion, it makes it more. And so I can relate to it on that level, because it just makes sense to me. So we can, to me, the joy and the sun and the healing comes a little bit with acknowledging that there's something to be healed from. And sometimes the farther I get away from my childhood, the more I remember some of those things that still need that healing. So going to music or art or other things that we can heal from doesn't diminish or take away from those experiences. I think it actually enhances them in positive ways. It puts
absolutely,
a grace on there, right? So
yeah,
I don't think it's dark.
No,
I don't think it's dark.
I don't think it's with this song though. If you really listen to, unfortunately we had to do an edited version because the powers that be, things like Spotify and whatnot, they actually complain if songs are too long. They're not good for playlisting. So but and I'm thankful because the song did get actually playlisted quite a bit, and so it did get a lot of. So I'm thankful, but on the definitive version, if you really listen, the way that it ends is kind of, I wanted to leave it like open-ended and ambiguous, like kind of melodically, like the harmony and stuff that's going on is not sad, it's not happy, it's just kind of, because I feel like that's the place of kind of the unspeakable, the mystery of life, which is all those things that you just described, you know what I mean? And so it's so I'm glad that that it made you think that way too, because that was definitely in my mind to kind of leave it like that way, because I during the last couple of years, I never, I would not consider myself a Catholic by any stretch of the imagination, and I didn't grow up in that tradition at all, you know what I mean? So, but I have got into some in my kind of pursuits of spiritual teachers and whatnot, and I read across the disciplines. So I've, during the pandemic, an old friend of mine, she's a Buddhist monk basically, and teaches at a meditation center in Joshua Tree. And so during the pandemic, they would have these online sits all the time. So I practiced that, but I also got into reading, and I never knew about this. So, I'm very more new to it, but like there's within kind of the Catholic tradition, there's a tradition of like, they call it like contemplative thinkers, and maybe the most recent kind of modern was a guy, Thomas Merton. And so I read some of his stuff, and then there's I've been finishing this book. I actually have it right here. It's by Saint Teresa of Avila, called Interior Castle, which is a great. She was a Spanish none within the, I'm trying to think when it, maybe like 1700s, or something. It's pretty, it was written quite a while ago. Yeah, but it's interesting because I've always felt at odds, because I went, when I went into literary studies, it was very, how do I say, like when you're in the human, and I don't mean this at all in negative terms, because it's not a criticism, because I actually very value that space. It's very non-spiritual in that way. It's very much like materialist, I guess is the word, where it's just like, we're studying this literature as a social phenomenon, and the things that the topics and things that the novels explore, poetry explores, whether to do with like kind of say like life relations and things like that. But in kind of literary criticism circles, and where it kind of lined up with things like European philosophy and whatnot, post-structuralism and deconstruction were like, and these kind of postmodern theories were very much in vogue at the time. And so it was kind of, and I was very much, and still am very attracted to that way of thinking. It has very much to do with my intellectual training. But I always, found that hard to line up with like, growing up and being like a spiritual person. They just seemed always at odds, because the way that they're taught, the way that you go, the way that disciplines are aligned, within a university or whatnot, like, religious studies or say, those kind of say are so far removed from say like literary studies, like they're two worlds apart. But kind of in the, what has been helpful to me and why I'm attracted to things like this kind of contemplative tradition is because when you get to that place of trying to describe, say, the experience of or knowledge of, or I don't even want to say, like a relationship or something with something called God. For these people, it's a deconstructive space. You can't. It's the unspeakable. It's mystery. It's where kind of rational thinking in that way isn't really that useful. And so you enter that space. It's a meditative space, much like Buddhism, where it's almost like a clearing of the mind, clearing of thought structures is actually more helpful than trying to describe it, but upon entering that space and then leaving that place, hopefully you come back a changed person through daily practice, right? So that's so I found ways, to where like I'm like, oh, like these things in my life that always seemed so far apart are starting to inform each other. And that's been, a source of great happiness for me, because I always felt like certain areas of my life would just be like disparate. Like I'd never be able to kind of fuse those things together. But I think it goes back more into what I was trying to say is like, what is my practice as an artist? I think because I am happier and okay with being myself, these things are making sense to me because I'm allowing them in the authenticity of myself to see the connections, and so totally. It's been a very powerful thing.
Were you raised evangelical like I was? Is that where do you have any of that background in this?
I mean, okay. Probably not as sure. No, not as probably as severe as you. I know, no, but I mean that, like I was never forced into anything too much other than, I, with my upbringing, my family, when we were kids, we didn't go to church or anything like that. Okay. I one day, like, because I would, you're a kid, you see things, you're like, I walked in to, whatever, to the house when they asked my dad, like, I'm like, how come some families go to church and we don't go to church? And he was like, oh no. Okay. Like, so he literally just like looked up like a church in the phone book,
That's
like, like I think you felt as a parent, like
very
if you have
different
it,
for me. Yeah.
like, yeah, like if you have a kid and he asked you about, like, it was his obligation as a parent, so
Mm,
so we started going to church a little bit, but it was, you know it wasn't like, in the big, it was never super heavy handed in my family,
mm,
in that way,
mhm.
even though, I have family members that still to this day, go to like more, say, traditional type of churches, which I don't, but because I've just never felt comfortable in that space, really. Like once I became an adult enough to know to kind of like figure things out on my own, I never truly thought, and especially, nowadays it could be considered really difficult because it's just
There's
everything's
there's a lot.
so
Yeah.
weird, so weird now. You know what I mean? But you know what I mean? But
Well, things were
yeah,
weird.
back in the game.
We're back in. We're back in, and hopefully we can finish this without being yelled at by my computer again. So you come to you always kind of had a quest for your own spirituality. It was always self-directed, and now this is just where you're at, joining together the different sides, the disparate sides of yourselves. So which is now also manifesting in your studies in life.
Yeah, I'm an autodidactic again. Yeah.
So are you working on more music? Do you intend to do more of your solo work? Tell me what's going on with you.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of Smashing Pumpkins. We're doing a big 33 song triple album magnum opus
Oh,
type of
wow.
thing, and so that's been something I've been working on all year, for the last, I mean, in all earnest, like probably like seriously, like the last 4 months of like,
Mm-hmm.
So once the vaccination was out and I was able to get vaccinated, and the engineer at my friend's studio, so I go there at least 2 or 3 days a week to work on that, and then I've been recording. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to put out at least an EP by the end of the year, but I'm kind
Mm-hmm.
of thinking, like, I'm writing so much material, I may just do a full album.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I'm working on that, like trying to squeeze in 2 days a week at the studio on that. So I'm working all the time.
Great.
But that's been a tough situation. You know what I mean? That's like trying to figure out, because it's like the world's your oyster. It's like, do I want to be reggae? Do I want to be hip hop? You know what I mean? I don't know what I want to do some days, so it's kind of like, because I like so many things, I was joking about reggae and hip hop, even though I do enjoy some of both. But
I would love to see you do a reggae and or
yeah,
hip hop album. I think that would be great
yeah,
fun. You
yeah,
could do different things or something.
yeah. So I'm doing that, and then and so I'm really, it's hard, I mean, it's like I really commend, the great, I've been in a lot of great bands, but when I, been in bands, people like Michael from the Violet Burning and
Mm-hmm.
Billy from the Pumpkins, who are able to kind of take these big things, these big albums and body of work, and start them, and then push them and see them through fruition. I really, now that I'm taking most of that weight, and I have people having help me, and singers that I'm collaborating, but it's like everything has to start with me, and it's a lot of, it's
Mm-hmm.
a position that I haven't really been in,
Mm-hmm.
and so I really am thankful that I've had great people like that to kind of be around and witness how they work, and how they do things, and but it's hard. I've
Does it
never.
make you nervous? Yeah, it's
Oh
more
yeah, for
pressure
sure.
than
For
yeah.
sure, for sure, and but it always returns to that question of like, well, it's just, you just have to be yourself. Don't worry.
Mm.
I mean, when I worry about things that are too far down the line, like,
Mm-hmm.
what's reception going to be like? Are people going to like this? Are people? It's like, you know what? You haven't even given this idea a chance to be born or
Mm.
live a life and develop, and become what it wants to be, you know, and you know, it's so funny because people, you would often hear people talk about like whatever their work, maybe it's stories or songs or poems, whatever it is kind of like children or something like that, or like giving birth to things. And yeah, and I do find that analogy to be a little bit more truthful to me now, because sometimes you're like, oh, I want it to sound like this cool Joy Division kind of post, you know, thing. And then you realize, well, this song doesn't want to be that. It wants to be a lot poppier than that, or much more, you know what I mean? And it really comes down to like, what is, you know, that thing with this kind of rhythm and chords and notes and melody. What does it want to be? You know, because they tend to sometimes have a life of their own, and
just like kids.
Yeah, and there's more there sometimes than you think. That if you limit it with your kind of like, I want it to be this, you know, sometimes you miss out on something really wonderful that that an idea can be. So I'm learning things like that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you. I know you have another interview to run to, so I am so grateful that you took some time to sit down and talk with me. It's been so great to catch up and to see you. And I wish it was in person so I could hug your neck too, but
I know. It's been amazing. Like I can't believe that it just flew by.
I know. I feel like we should just schedule like, you know, catch ups like once a month or something. That would be
honestly,
great.
Yeah. We totally should. I mean that. So
okay,
anytime.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and your mind.
I know, like opportunities like this where I can really like talk about like truth, like what I really, you know what I mean? It's like there's so few and far between that I'm like, because most of the time it's like, oh, what's the new Pumpkins record? Like, what's your new, you know what I mean? Which is great, you know what I mean? I'm thankful for it, but this is like more like if we were just, like what I'm really like.
Absolutely.
And so I
it's
appreciate
the best part, because you are so fantastic. You are the same now that as you were. Obviously, there's been some changes, but you're still the same kind, generous, sweet person that you were at 21 when I met you all those years ago. All this fame and fortune and fantasticness does not alter the true character and kindness of who you are. And I think that's pretty remarkable. And I just adore you, and I love that you took the time to talk to me, and I can't thank you enough. So if you ever want to come back on, anytime.
No, honestly, anytime. Like if there's more things like you want to, I'm anytime. This is, I mean that. Okay, I would love to. You. I would truly love to. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who are.
Yeah, and let's just catch up too.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. I would love to. And thank you guys, all of you who are watching and stay tuning in to listen on the podcast or watching on YouTube. Make sure you like, subscribe, all the things that one does to stay in the loop. And thank you again, Jeff, and have a great rest of the day.
Okay, bye.